Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again. Tomorrow it's Friday, Parashat Vayetze, and I'd like just to say a few words in this week's portion that connect to what's going on in the southern part of Israel, the constant threat of terrorism we have in this country, the hundreds of rockets that were fired upon our land, and it's so amazing how the Torah hints to everything, as the famous Zohar HaKadosh, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Leka midei de lo remiza b'oraita, there is nothing that's not hinted within the Torah. And we see this last week's portion when this whole rocket attack began. We read about the struggle in the southern part of the country of Isaac against the Philistines, that same struggle that Abraham had to struggle beforehand. And the Torah goes out of its way to say that Isaac uncovered the wells that were clogged up after Abraham's death. And not only that Isaac uncovers the wells that were clogged up after Abraham's death, but he called them by the same names that his father Abraham did. And this is a very important lesson. And it symbolized something very, very deep. We know the well, and I want to give you some more examples of the wells. The well concept in the Torah, and we'll see it in this week's portion as well in a moment. If we follow the pattern of the well represents the divine providence. It represents the divine abundance, the lights of the Torah that are deeply, deeply hidden within the universe. And it is our job as those who bear the divine essence and those who connect themselves to the creator of the universe to reveal the lights that are hidden lights. The struggle in the world is a struggle over good and bad. When the evil in the world wants to rule, they try to clog up the wells and cover the divine abundance, any kind of evil act. When we sin to the creator of the universe, we do the wrong thing, and we don't behave properly, morally, we unfortunately we are closing the pipelines of divine abundance in the world, and therefore the world is faced with trouble and calamity and tragedy and terrible things that take place in the world is a result of the lack of the divine light being able to burst forth, to gush forth, to rectify the world. Now these wells represent that deep concept. Now Isaac, when he comes along and he's revealing those wells that were clogged up, he's again uncovering the divine abundance and letting it gush forth to rectify the world. But he's constantly struggling over that with the Philistines, the so-called Palestinians, right? Which we are, of course, believe is no nation. It's a false nation. There's no Palestine. The only true Palestine is the state of Israel and the people in Israel. So our struggle over the Gaza, right, is all about, again, the light of Hashem shining in the world. They want to close up the light of Israel, and they want to force us off the land. So that's a struggle, and that same struggle that began way back in Abraham's day, in the southern part of Israel as well, and to this very day we're dealing with that. And the other thing we see is Isaac very, very carefully calls those wells that he redigs the same exact names that his father Abraham did, and that represents something great as well. Why does the Torah have to stress that? The Torah stresses that, explaining to us how important it is not to turn our back on our heritage and always connect ourselves to the missions and to what our forefathers have done, and to continue where they left off, and not to go off and turn our back to that so important heritage. When we do so, when we ourselves are turning away from Torah, from our heritage that we received as the people of Israel, and don't follow Torah, and make up our own things, and live lives that are totally secular, we are turning our backs to the creator of the universe, turning our backs on our forefathers that gave their lives for building a land of Torah, a land of Israel with Torah and spirituality, not only physically. So it's important to constantly remember where we've come from and continue that same line of heritage. Now that's a very important fact as well. Now we see the well as a representative of this, symbolizing the spirituality, the abundance in many instances in the Torah. I'm going to give a few examples, so I want to bring it up to our portion, of course. So if we look for just one example, which stands out right away, is the story of Isaac himself when his servant Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, went to get him a wife. And Eliezer goes out and he says, let it be that the girl that comes around, that she's going to give me to drink and my animals to drink, she will be the wife of Isaac. So we see that the divine providence The well represents the source of the divine energy. That whole abundance that has to come in the world is going to bring about a family for Isaac, which is the continuation of the lineage of Israel. That stems from that same well of divine providence. Eliezer turning to God. That's one example. Another example, of course, is the story of Hagar. When she has to run away from Sarah, she comes out there and the angel appears to her by a well, right? And the well is called Be'er Lachai Roi, the well of Lachai, referring to an angel, which is that lives forever, or a source of success. Roi is the ability to see that the divine providence is something that is constantly looking upon everything. That whole thing of there, Hagar receives a blessing. So we see again the well representing the divine abundance. Later on, we see the same well. We're going to get back to our portion, but let's skip over a second and go to Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet of all time. Moshe Rabbeinu, again, we're running away from after he smites the Egyptian, and he comes to the Midian, and he has to cope with the shepherds that are chasing away Jethro's daughters from the well, and he saves them. And from there, that's how he beats his wife. So again, the divine providence, Moshe meeting his wife, continuing the line of Israel. But not only that, Moshe Rabbeinu here, he represents even more so the teacher of Torah to the world, right? He brought down the Torah to humanity, right? He was God's emissary and the greatest prophet of all time. As it says in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 5, it says, Ho'il Moshe be'er the Torah zot. Moshe Rabbeinu explains the Torah. And the word in Hebrew for explaining is the same word for well. That the Torah is like a be'er, like a well that has to be explained and to gush forth. And that Moshe Rabbeinu represents so powerfully. It's the same expression we use, a blessing. We want to bless a Talmudic scholar or a great, you want to bless a great student of Torah. You say, Yafutzu ma'anotecha chutza. Let your springs gush forth to water everything. So you want that Torah to come out and bring life to the world and bring abundance to the world and light up the world. So all these examples we see this over. The wells represent divine providence, the abundance of Hashem coming forth, and as we saw, these various sources. Now this week's portion, of course, we see the same thing. Jacob leaves Haran. Leaves Be'er Sheva, Vayelech Haran, on the way to Haran. Okay? On the way, he stops over Jerusalem and Bet El, that famous, of course, vision of the ladder. And when Jacob comes out, and he's standing by, he goes out there and he sees a well. And I'd like to read the verses in the Bible. It says in chapter 29, Vayal v'nei be'er basadeh, and he sees, behold, there's a well in the field. V'nei sham shlosha edrei tzon, and there are 3 flocks of sheep surrounding the well. Ki min ha'be'er hahi yashku adarim. From that well, all the flocks will be watered. Va'even gedola al pi ha'be'er. Here it says, Va'even gedola al pi ha'be'er. Here it says that a large stone was covering over the well. And again, immediately when the large stone is covering over a well, it is very similar to a well being clogged up. At that point, there is no ability to allow that the abundance to come forth. That's another symbol that Jacob has to, when he's coming down to Haran, being outside the land of Israel, he has to cope now with the evil forces in the world, the Lavan forces of Laban and his household that want to, and the Arameans that want to prevent the light of Torah from shining, the light of the divine providence from sprouting forth. And then it says, "V'nesu shama kol hadarim v'nigalut heaven." Everyone together will have to, in order to remove the stone. In other words, when there is unity, when we all get together and unify ourselves around the proper message of Torah, then there's ability to uncover the well and reveal the beautiful light that's within the well. And what happens? Of course, it's very interesting. This I heard from Rav Uri Shalki. He says something very interesting. He says he tries to expand on the words of the verse in a metaphorical sense. He says, "Vayomelem Yaakov achai ma'ayin atem." And Jacob says to he goes, "Brothers, where are you from?" And in Hebrew, it's very interesting. The word "where are you from" is ayin, ma'ayin. Where are you from? Ma'ayin atem. And in Hebrew, that same word could also mean from the infinite, from the without. You're from the without. In other words, Jacob was saying to them, brothers, relax, you're all from Ayin. We all come from the infinite light of the Ein Sof, from the endless creator of the universe. And he was trying to show them, teach them spirituality. We're all come from a very high level. Relax, things will be okay. And what did they answer him? And they answer him, we're from Haran. Now, what does Haran mean? Haran refers to anger, literally. The name of the word, the Charaf Hashem, God's anger. Rashi says something very interesting in Noah, in chapter 11. Rashi says, why is the nun for the word Hanan turned upside down? And he says, to teach us, Ad Avraham, until Abraham came to the world, Haya Charon Af Shel Makom Balam, there was God's anger in the world. And this I clarified in one of my lessons, that nature, until Abraham comes along and shows the world that there's a God that's beyond nature, until that happened, the world was totally totally under the influence of nature, the way they saw everything. So these people that Jacob is coming to, he says to them, where are you from? Don't worry, you're from the Ayin, you're from the Ein Sof, you're from the endless creator of the universe, connected to something beyond nature. And they're saying, no, we're just from nature. In other words, they were totally engulfed in the concept that there's only nature and there's no God in the world, very far away from God. And this is what Abraham had to cope with. He was trying to uplift right away. But anyway, when Abraham sees Rachel, what does he do? It says he lifts off the stone by himself. A stone that usually takes everyone to lift off all the shepherds, he does it by himself. Now it's very interesting. In Hebrew, the word for stone is Even. Aleph, Bet, and Nun Sofit. Now, Even is in Hebrew, means Av. It has the words Av, father and son, within that same word. Even. Now, what does that mean to the father and son? It refers to this relation we were talking about beforehand, that if we turn our backs, as we are all the children of God, we're all the daughters and the sons of Hashem, and if we turn our backs on our fathers, right, so we're going to end up being stuck with a clogged up well. We're not going to have the divine abundance. The secret to allow the divine abundance to flow in the world is if we're able to look back to our Father and say, wow, this is what our parents, the legacy they left us, and I want to continue. Only, of course, I mentioned before, if our parents were righteous, like our forefathers, right? We're all righteous. We have to say their legacy is beautiful. But Laban's legacy, obviously the daughters of Laban have to run away from, they ran away from their father because he was evil and he wanted to uproot Jacob and the family. But here we're saying the whole message of Jacob is he is in command over the stone, right? Because when a person looks back to whose father was, which is a stone is a father and a son, so then as a son here, I am continuing what my father's legacy is all about. And that's why Jacob had the power to turn over the stone and to allow all the water to come forth and to gush forth. And this concept we see later on in the portion as well. The stone comes back again when they made a gal'ed, a mound of testimony between Lavan. He makes a covenant at the end of the portion with Laban as well. When Jacob finally gets a chance to return to the land of Israel, and they make using the same stones. And we see the concept of stone is very, very, later on it's mentioned with the blessings of Jacob. Shamua Even Yisrael. The concept of stone is very, very, it's very symbolic in the Torah itself. It's something that's steadfast and strong and represents that unbreakable relationship between our forefathers and the children as the generations come down. So this concept of revealing the hidden lights and looking back at our heritage, where we come from, and continuing that line, is what the center of the portion Vayetze is all about. Jacob leaves his father's home. He comes out of Israel temporarily to build his life and return to the land, but he never turned his back. He never turned his back on the land of Israel, and his heart was always, that's why he makes a pledge to return, because his heart knows where his place is at and where he has to come back to. And of course, out of all places, Jacob returns, as we know, we read about that, as returning to the land of Israel, which is here in Shechem near Itamar, which symbolizes entering the land. It symbolizes that connection with Abraham and our patriarchs, an unbreakable chain that will give us the light of Hashem that will be revealed and unleashed and rectify all of Israel. So this concept is very important to understand the struggle we're in today. Israel's been shaken up, but not only with rockets, now politically, there's going to be elections soon. The world is having terrible tragedies around the world, and all these tragedies that take place in the world is a result of a world that's not rectified yet. When the world is not focused on Hashem and connected to Hashem, the world has to rectify. And it causes turmoil, because nature takes over. God withdraws his presence. And nature is very, very cruel, and nature can do very difficult things. And we have the forces of nature on one hand that are causing a lot of trouble in the world. And then you have the evil forces in the world that they're causing a lot of trouble in the world. And unfortunately, a lot of people say, how could God allow these terrible things to happen to people and terrible tragedies? And of course, we have to look at these tragedies and cry with tears, and our heart should be broken over to see people lose the loss of life and terrible tragedies that take place. Natural tragedies, fires and earthquakes and floods and all around the world. Terrible. But we have to realize, and this is just like the flood of Noah, that when people believe only in nature and they totally turn their backs to the creator of the universe, unfortunately, the cruelty of nature will take over. In order for us to go above nature, we have to really connect and really rectify our inner ways. And unfortunately, when the world is judged as a unit, cities, places together, it's not like a person could be very righteous on his personal side, but doesn't mean that he will not be swept up in nature, because nature, when God withdraws himself, there's no distinction between the righteous and the non-righteous. And that's a very important thing to understand. The world has to overcome the forces of nature by saying we are turning to God who's beyond nature. And that's where the true mercy and kindness lies. But when we think it's in our ability to prevent everything, we know it all, our technology can handle it all and rectify any problem, and people have turned science into their God, that's when so God turns to them and says, okay, you want to believe in science, you want to believe in nature, I'm turning my back to the world. So that obviously is, we're not coming along to saying, God forbid, that science is bad, science is beautiful. We're realizing that God gave us the ability to do so many things and technological things, but we can never turn our eyes on the creator of the universe. Countries who have done so have collapsed. Look at the communist regime who created a whole world centered around the lack of God. Eventually totally fell apart and was destroyed. Any country in the world that takes God out of the picture eventually will have no ability to maintain itself for a long period of time. And the world has to wake up. This story of Jacob uncovering the stone, revealing the divine abundance, a struggle against two things. Number one, struggling against the evil forces in the world that want to shut out God's divine providence. Number two, of course, by shutting out Hashem, there are those who have turned their backs to God completely and only believe in nature. And the world will have to be judged by nature, which is very cruel. When a lion sees a deer, the deer will be devoured. Nature is very, very powerful. And when we look above nature, we turn to the creator of the universe, we will persevere, and Hashem will turn his face towards us and shine his abundance and light upon all of us. Blessings for a beautiful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. B'sorot tovot, Yeshuot v'nechama.